is one of the quantum advantages that quantum networks have. And security is an interesting point because in the internet, in the evolution of that network and the networks of networks, security wasn't really front of mind, and it was kind of tacked on at the end. And there are plenty of vulnerabilities and security on the internet today. And so we do have an opportunity here to really build these security first principles into the quantum internet as it evolves.
Welcome to Impact Quantum.
Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's...
Hello and welcome back to Impact Quantum, the podcast where we explore the emerging industry that is quantum computing. We don't need to be a physicist, you just need to be curious about the technology. And with me is the most quantum curious person I know, Candace Gahuli. How's it going, Candace?
It's going great. Thank you, Frank. It's going great. Today, we are going to be speaking with Michael Kubadoo, who is the co-founder at Alero Quantum Technologies. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm a big fan of the podcast and really honored to be here as a guest.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It's always good to one, find out we have fans, and then two, to meet one. So Alero, I'm looking at kind of their just basic talk. This looks really interesting. It's a quantum networking company. So for those who may not be in the know, what exactly is a quantum networking company?
So quantum networks are new kinds of networks where traditional networks send zeros and ones around. And quantum networks, while they can send zeros and ones around, they can actually send qubits or quantum states over these channels. And those channels could be fiber, they could be over free space. So it's really a way to communicate quantum data across distance. And so to build a company around quantum networking, there are many pieces of technology that comprise a quantum network, from different kinds of hardware, different components, but then all of the software stack, the whole networking stack that really drives what we can do with these kinds of networks. And that's what we focus on at Alero.
Interesting.
So what role, I'm thinking about networks, and so it just makes me think naturally of entanglement. So what role does entanglement and quantum repeaters play in making these long distance quantum networks possible?
That's a really great question. And similar to the evolution of the internet, and there were different generations on the way to the internet that we know and love today. It really started as a network for science exchange and to share data across distance between labs. No one really envisioned the applications that we know and love today. And we see the same kinds of trends in quantum networking. And the key resource in the internet is, again, these zeros and ones and how fast you can send them, where those zeros and ones can reach over a certain distance. And those are the services that really underpin all the great applications. And the same kind of analog applies to quantum networking, where, as you said, entanglement is one such resource. That different applications can use entanglement in different ways. Now, there's a lot more complexity with entanglement than zeros and ones, right? There are different kinds of entangled states. This notion of fidelity or the quality of entanglement, where there really isn't that quality of a zero or a one in classical networks. So it is a different paradigm, but some analogies do apply. You can view entanglement really as a resource that the network is providing. And then you can build services and applications on top of that entanglement. But there are different generations of quantum networks too. Quantum networks have been demonstrated now for decades. And the first generations were really about just sending single qubits or single quantum states and superposition across this network. And what you mentioned as entanglement is really what we see as the next generation of quantum networking, the kind of quantum 2.0 of networks, where now we can have not just single photons or single qubits, but now entangled pairs or larger clusters of qubits that are entangled with each other and have this special correlation across distance. And that opens the door for all sorts of applications in security and computing and sensing and others.
Interesting. So does that mean that this would be impervious, or for I'll use that term with a little asterisk because we don't know yet, really. Does this mean that snooping would automatically be detected because you're sending the superposition, so it's inherently secure?
Absolutely. That's really one of the big promises, one of the quantum advantages that quantum networks have. And security is an interesting point because in the internet, in the evolution of that network and the networks of networks, security wasn't really front of mind, and it was kind of tacked on at the end. And there are plenty of vulnerabilities and security on the internet today. And so we do have an opportunity here to really build these security first principles into the quantum internet as it evolves. But that's absolutely right. These quantum physics principles like entanglement, superposition, the no cloning theorem, these core principles of quantum physics really drive those security properties. So as you said, spoofing or eavesdrop detection, where you can actually detect when there's some adversaries or some funkiness going on the network, that will produce patterns and measurement results from these nodes that can really detect when those things are going on. So it's kind of interesting where, as you introduced this podcast focusing on quantum computing, these sensitivities of quantum states are actually a bug in quantum computing because they're very hard to control, and you want a computer to be reliable and robust and isolated from the environment. So this kind of noise is a bug for computing, but it's actually a feature for networking. This fragility of quantum states, the sensitivity to its environment, is actually what unlocks these security principles and this new kind of quantum advantage. So eavesdrop detection, spoof detection, these things are really baked into the physics itself.
So theoretically, it's impervious, but who knows what conversation we'll be having in 10 to 15 years about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Security, they're all, that theoretical security is one piece of the puzzle, right? And
right.
At the end of the day, to build a quantum network, it sits in a box somewhere. There's some collection of hardware. There's the software that runs it. So there are many other attack vectors to think about. But at its core, that's where we really derive a lot of the security value. It's from that physics itself and using that physics for security. Whereas, security today in the internet, it's really based on math and assumptions about computational complexity and all sorts of things. Whereas this is really a physics-based approach.
So for those listening, and for Candace and for Michael as well, if I sound a little grumpy about that, it's not the concussion or the funky glasses. It's because I remember sitting in a training class for Windows NT, maybe 92, 93, and the instructor, who might have been a Microsoft employee, I don't remember, had basically boldly proclaimed that because it was based on the new NT kernel and various security features of that computer viruses would be impossible to make in the future. So again, I didn't really buy it at the time. Sounded a little far-fetched, but I kind of sort of believed it. I was kind of I was a bit in a state of superposition about it. But obviously, as time moved on, clearly, the NT kernel and, Windows XP and et cetera, have not been immune to malware. So that's why it's not that I don't trust it or I don't believe in the physics. It's just, like you said, like at some point this has to sit in the physical thing and what sort of software vulnerabilities will be uncovered. But it does give bad actors a much bigger hill to climb in order to mess with your network.
That's right. And I think this is where a healthy dialogue around the security of these quantum networks, what applications it's being used for what kind of data, what parts of the network are we talking about, what critical infrastructure, is it, electric grid, is it securing financial transactions, government communications. There are all sorts of security requirements and compliance and different regulations around what security means operationally to these stakeholders. So that's a really healthy conversation, and one that's worth having on the international stage as we start to think about standards and how to roll this out in the right way, to make sure these networks can talk to each other securely, even if they're using different approaches to build quantum networks. So that's a really healthy conversation, and that's what I think we can expect in the coming years as this technology really matures. But we all really agree on this kind of the driver, the core principles of using physics and the laws of physics for security first. And it's a lot harder to break the laws of physics than it may be to find a side channel attack, right? So
Right.
but this is the discussion we need to be having. It's like what do these attack vectors look like? What do quantum adversaries look like? What do we project our adversaries will be using as new tools? Is it AI? Is it quantum? Is it some mixture of both to try and attack these networks? Is it to read communications off the wire, or is it easier to blackmail someone, right? But these are practical considerations that we have to think about, in the coming years as we start to really roll this out in production.
Interesting.
It's really exciting, everything that it's touching upon. It's quantum networking. What advice would you give to a researcher or an entrepreneur who's passionate about entering the space?
That's a great question. One thing that's important to know is that quantum computing is coming, and even experts within the field couldn't say that confidently even a few years ago. It's no longer a matter of if, but a matter of when. And I think all the great advances in error correction, have really made the case that quantum computing is really on a trajectory to hit the stage, in production sooner than we thought, which is great. But with any sort of emerging technology with this kind of power and potential, we understand that this in the wrong hands or in adversarial hands can be used to attack the digital security that we rely on today. So we need to prepare for that. Now the question becomes, how do we prepare our networks to become quantum safe, to become quantum resistant, to become quantum secure? And you hear these words thrown around a lot, but that's extremely important for governments, for critical infrastructure, our energy grids, our banks, to really think about migrating to a quantum safe, a quantum aware posture for their cybersecurity. The attacks are ever changing, and we're seeing this play out on many different stages, in military contexts, and political conflicts, in hacks. Right, there are all sorts of cyber attacks, and now with AI, playing a big role as well. It's not just quantum. Just have more awareness that technology is moving very rapidly at an increasing pace, and we need to prepare our networks and our critical infrastructure, not take it for granted, and be proactive about it, and don't be reactive. So that's the advice I'd say. Just awareness around these attacks, preparing for that, and doing research into what's out there to protect these networks. Where does having this physics layer make sense for your data, for your kind of network? There are a lot of organizations figuring out right now, like, how much of my stuff do I want in the cloud versus on-prem? How much do I trust these big hyperscalers and cloud vendors? And so as they're going through this migration, figuring out, okay, how much AI am I going to adopt? How much cloud am I going to adopt? Where does my network security lie in that? It's all a related problem. It's very hard to decouple. So this is not a problem that's decades out, that it's fun to think about and a good exercise. No, this is something that's very important and a complex topic to start breaking down. So even just doing the inventory of what's in place right now, what am I using for security? Who wrote that code? Was it a decade ago, and is that engineer still on staff? Is it written in an old programming language that I don't have an engineering team to support? So those questions, just doing the surveying, the inventory, can take a long time, and it's very complex. So getting started on that process today is really critical, and that's the practical advice I would give.
Then it sounds like you're describing SBOM or secure bill of materials is going to be a part of and that makes sense, right? Like it makes, so for those that don't know, we'll have to explain that because my wife works in IT security, so I kind of know some of the goings on in terms. But one of the I think you're right. I think we have to have as a society, that is increasingly reliant on this technology to have very frank conversations, no pun intended, about how we secure our infrastructure, right? I mean, look at the chaos that having US East 1 of AWS going down caused, all the way from, websites go down all the way to, some people had IoT devices that were basically locked, including, and I'll pick on them for many years to come, is the smart bed. Apparently there was a smart bed that was collecting, it, measures how well you sleep and all that, but it would not do anything unless it could talk to US East 1. And, we're recording this a day after a massive Verizon outage.
Right.
Right. So, we need to understand what our, vulnerability of it, because, for all we know, these are just natural happenings, right? Not a coordinated cyber attack, for all we know. Right? We'll never, what will we ever really know the full truth? Maybe. But Candace shaking her head no, like probably not. But but I mean, what if this was, a coordinated attack? Like how vulnerable are we really?
Yeah, and another point to that end is around attacks that are happening now that we don't even know about, that we can't
Right.
see directly, that aren't taking user-facing applications down and making a big fuss in the public eye. There are adversaries out there that are just harvesting data. They're even if they can't crack it yet, they're harvesting it, and some years down the road, when they have access to these high-scale compute systems and quantum computers, they'll be able to look back in time and crack that communication. So this is especially important for the kinds of data that you want to keep secret for a very long time, whether that's sensitive financial records, if it's medical records, if it's government communications, nation secrets, right? There are certain classes of data that you want to remain secure for decades, right? And so, but that's a threat that's happening now. The harvesting, it opens you up to this kind of attack at some point in the future. So a lot of what we do when we engage with these security stakeholders is to just make them aware that this is happening, and to drive the urgency to be proactive today, and making them understand that these kinds of attacks that aren't visible are still happening, and we do have a lot of dependencies on certain cloud infrastructure, data centers, physical infrastructure, and these undersea cables, right? We need to think hard and take a close look at what are our dependencies, how do we mitigate them, and what are the attacks that take priority. Right?
Oh, that's a good way to put it. And I know Candace is itching to ask you questions. And I don't want to monopolize your time, but I after Candace's, I want to go through because one, your website's awesome, and two, I have some questions about some of the use cases, because those are things I never considered, and those look awesome. So sorry, Candace, go ahead.
No, it's totally fine. So let me ask you, so what role do you see simulation and hybrid classical quantum systems playing in building and testing quantum networks before large scale deployment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's really why we've spent many years building a very robust simulation platform and a product. As you said, rightly so, this is a complex technology. It's one that's evolving. As Frank mentioned, there are other use cases beyond security that I'd love to get into. But we have to coexist with what's here today, right? We can't lay down a whole new infrastructure just for quantum. There's fiber in the ground. It's very expensive to lay new fiber. There's technology we can leverage today. Let's use it. There are lessons we can take from the internet. There's, classical security and math-based security that we use every day. And, but every time you see that lock icon and your URL, that's encryption. And we need to coexist with those mechanisms. It's well baked and very prevalent throughout. So that's really the role simulation can play, is to help figure out, okay, as I start implementing, a quantum friendly or quantum enabled infrastructure, how does it coexist with what I have today? What fiber am I using in the ground? What does it look like to introduce quantum devices onto my network? How can I combine these new quantum security applications with my existing security applications? You mentioned smart beds. Am I going to get qubits to your smart bed? Probably not. There's no quantum Wi-Fi, and so what that means is, when we talk about rolling out quantum networking and quantum security, quantum encryption, it needs to be deployed in the right places for the right use cases, and over time that may grow, but we know that not everything is going to be quantum. The quantum internet is not going to replace the classical internet by any means. It is going to augment it. It's going to add new capabilities for certain applications, certain parts of the network. But classical networks will absolutely play a role in our future. And so we need to coexist with what's there. Simulation is really critical to address those questions, to figure out how to build these hybrid networks where parts of your network are just classical, parts of them have quantum communication on it. How can those nodes talk to each other end to end in a secure way? So it's the networking, the protocols, the security, but also the physics, right? We need to model how these networks work, what kind of hardware you actually need to build a quantum network for a certain scale, what kinds of rates and fidelities you need. There are all sorts of trade-offs when designing a quantum network. And so simulation is really critical, not just in planning and designing a quantum network, but figuring out how to scale it, how to introduce these new applications, simulating new kinds of protocols beyond just symmetric keys and encryption keys. So there's all sorts of use cases for quantum simulation that is much cheaper than actually acquiring some of this quantum specialized hardware, which could be quite pricey in some cases.
Okay.
Interesting.
Go ahead, Frank.
All right. I'm chomping at the bit because one, your website's really well designed. And two, networking quantum computers, solving the scaling problem. That is the one that blew my mind. If you're watching the video, you can see when I really click through that. That is an amazing concept where, it reads like, and I don't know how, is this happening now where I could have, say, if I have a quantum computer, I can network with that with another one, and I can have basically clusters of quantum computing, which is not something I heard a lot of people talk about yet. They always show like, here's our chandelier, right? And all that. But like the whole idea of having like basically an entire, cluster of these chandeliers, how real is that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's I'm glad we have an opportunity to talk about how quantum networks really enable quantum computing. So quantum networks are not just good for security, and they're not good just for long distance communication. What is a data center? A data center is a network of clustered compute resources, even GPU clusters. There's the famous saying, the network is the computer, right? It's the same principle applies here for quantum computing. The conversation, as you pointed out, used to be, my qubit is better than yours. My material, my platform has better fidelity, or it's faster, or it's this or that, or it can run longer circuits. There are all sorts of metrics that the quantum computing community would talk about. Now we're entering a phase where we used to have small, noisy, intermediate scale quantum computers, which could have maybe a dozen qubits, and they're very unreliable and noisy. But really over the past years, since we started Alero, we've seen the amazing advances in quantum computing, where now we're at the orders of hundreds or thousands of qubits. We now have error correction. We have some level of protecting against noise. And so the conversation is starting to shift from here's why my qubit is better than yours to here's why my path to scalability is better than yours. And
Right.
I think that's the critical transition in the dialogue that we're seeing. It's all about scalability. Now that I've achieved the error correction threshold, I can build, a logical qubit. How do I scale to millions and millions of qubits? And the same thing with classical computers and GPUs and CPUs. There's no monolithic single chip that runs everything, right? A data center is a network of small computers. And the same thing applies to quantum computing. So now that opens all sorts of fun questions around what does that quantum data center look like? What does the quantum network look like to actually communicate qubits across different quantum computers? And that's some of the networking problems that we solve with our stack as well. How to manage quantum traffic between computers, how to manage all the scheduling and the different timescales that these quantum computers operate at, how to provide this reliable entanglement as a service, as a resource to these different compute clusters. There are all sorts of interesting questions from not only a physics aspect, but the whole networking stack, the compute stack to support it. And just to throw another curveball in there, we have GPUs to play with as well. NVIDIA has invested a lot of money and resources into playing a big role in really pioneering how quantum computers will interact with their GPUs, right? So you're going to have this hybrid quantum data center. You have quantum computers, you have GPUs, you might have different kinds of quantum computers playing a role. You have CPUs, you have networks that are quantum, networks that are classical. They all need to work together. They all need to be orchestrated and play this complex dance with each other, so we can solve really large scale and impactful problems.
Wow.
So
What I'm sorry, Candace. Okay,
I'll
go.
say, so what, from your perspective, what are the most realistic near-term use cases for quantum networking beyond the pure research?
Yeah, great question. There are all sorts of applications for a quantum network, and one common misconception that we face is when folks hear the word quantum, they either think about a Marvel movie or something mythical and very far off into the future. There's that camp. There's the other camp that's quantum aware, and they hear the word quantum and they think about quantum computing. And that's really dominated the airwaves and the discourse for quantum technology, and rightly so. It has many huge potentials in solving problems exponentially faster than other kinds of computers. That's great. But one thing we face is that to build a useful quantum network, you don't need a quantum computer. There are other kinds of quantum devices, special quantum lasers and detectors and other sorts of optics and photonics that you don't need a full-scale quantum computer to do these security applications, for example, to generate secure keys between nodes, to have a secure link. You don't need a quantum computer to do that. So those are the use cases that are near term, right? Those ones where we don't rely on error correction and fault tolerant quantum computers. We just have security and key generation and these other sorts of applications in the near term. I think in the medium term, we'll see other kinds of security applications, not just for keys, but to actually use the quantum channel to encode our sensitive data. So using what's called quantum secure direct communication. There's teleportation. There's new kinds of authentication methods. So we can actually use these quantum networks to verify location and to verify the position of nodes on a network. This is something you can't do classically. So this is a way that's quantum position verification has this non-spoofing property to it, which is really nice. So we expect that in the medium term as well. And then in the long term, we can think about a distributed quantum computing where you're connecting quantum computers over a long distance. There's great applications, not just in computing, but the security of that computing as well. So who's going to own these quantum computers? Is it the cloud titans, right? If so, how do I actually securely send my algorithm, my computation to the cloud? to the U.S. Quantum East one, and get those results back securely, and doing so without showing Amazon or showing the cloud vendor what is my algorithm, what's my proprietary data that I'm putting into that quantum computer. So quantum networks can also help out with the security of those large scale quantum computing use cases, but that's in the longer term. So to answer your question in the TLDR, security is near term, and over time there are all these other sorts of applications in computing, in sensing, even some far-fetched ones as well, like quantum money. There's the potential to have more trustworthy elections and leader election kinds of applications, secret sharing. There's all some really cool distributed protocols we can use entanglement for. And we're really excited about those. But as a company, we have to be focused on what's here today, what's commercially viable, what are folks interested in, what is the market telling us they need, and how can quantum networks serve those needs. So that's front of mind for us, on the day to day. But of course, we spend some time researching these long-term applications.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned quantum money. Is that some kind of crypto thing? Because I've never heard that before.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Quantum money is actually one of the first distributed quantum algorithms that was conceived of. I think it was in the 60s. I have to double check on that. But the first concepts of quantum money, it's decentralized. It's basically using essentially a quantum signature that can't be forged. So with today's digital currencies, there is there are security vulnerabilities and forgery. Blockchain is designed to be decentralized, of course, but with quantum money, the idea is you can have these quantum signatures where you can have, let's say a bank be the only ones to verify whether this piece of currency is real. So they're fun exercises in thinking about how these quantum physics principles can be used for money and to stop forgery. That actually inspired some of the work for quantum key distribution, which came later. So it's kind of an interesting evolution. And I've heard Peter Shor talk about this, where there's quantum money that inspired quantum key distribution. And the folks who invented quantum key distribution asked Peter Shor to work on a security proof for it. That security proof led Peter Shor to ultimately discover Shor's algorithm, which really inspired all the quantum computing progress. So it's kind of a fun history lesson. But quantum money, while it's very far-looking and very long-term application, was one of the first ideas of quantum networking that came out in the middle of last century.
Interesting. So a lot to unpack. But the short thing is, when it comes to conventional networking, we all understand what a gigabit is. We all understand what, a megabit is. Like, are there similar, what are the speeds that we're talking about with quantum networking?
Yeah, great question. There are many factors that go into determining what is the speed of a quantum network. And the biggest factor being the distance of your channel. So if we're doing this in fiber, fiber is quite lossy, and we lose a lot of our flying qubits. So that really determines what is the maximum rate that we can transmit quantum data. There's all other sorts of factors, like how fast are your lasers and your entanglement sources, how good are your detectors, the quality of your hardware will determine that rate. But there are analogs, right? And I touched on this in a recent research paper I did with NIST on quantum routing, entanglement routing. And in there, we start to make some analogs between, metrics. What are the metrics we know and love from the classical internet? So things like throughput, bandwidth, your typical performance metrics. Do those apply to quantum networks? In some cases, yes. It's a direct analog. In some cases, no, it's a very different paradigm. In some cases, yes, but it's a very different kind of unit. So you mentioned throughput as an example. What are the rates? In a quantum network, that could be qubits per second. It could be entangled pairs per second. But again, with quantum networks, you have this notion of quality, fidelity that you don't have in zeros and ones. So, which brings an interesting question about the quality of service of these quantum networks. So some applications, they really need a very high rate of entanglement. They really need qubits as fast as possible, but they don't care that they need, if they're 99% fidelity. Other applications, they don't care if it's that fast. They just need really good quality of entanglement. So building a network stack, building a network that can service these different kinds of applications, and so you can have these knobs that you can tune, whether that's rate, whether that's fidelity, whether it's the network complexity and the switching capabilities. There are all sorts of metrics to think about. But we started to address those questions a little bit, and I know there are plenty of groups out there thinking about quantum networking metrics, and I think that's something we can work on as a community, to have a common language. What metrics are important? What's going to drive economic value?
Right.
How do we start to understand what these metrics actually mean for commercial use?
Right. I can
So-
imagine, like, at some point in the future, you'll be like in the not distant future, everyone, distant future. I'll be in the store of a Best Buy or like Micro Center and like, hey, this is the 10 gigabit, and this is the 20 gigabit, quantum router or something like that. Like, I mean, you're right. Like, and does it even make sense? You're right. Like, we need to figure out, like, what numbers make sense, right? Like,
Right. And is it, you can buy a box or a laser at a certain rate. And there are those kinds of components available commercial off the shelf today. You can, buy a photon source that generates, this many pairs per second at, say, a gigahertz rate or a kilohertz rate. It's tuned to this wavelength or that wavelength. Does that make sense for your application? What kinds of distances could that actually cover point to point? So there's all other sorts of questions around it. But yeah, I think we're starting to see that emerge, and especially over the past 7 years or so that we've been working at Alero, we've really seen that trend pick up, and so many amazing quantum hardware startups focused on networking that are building these entanglement sources, these photon sources, these photon detectors, the quantum switches, all the components we need, quantum memories as well, quantum repeaters that are being worked on, and we're seeing so much activity in that space. And as Alero, we're really focused on kind of the networking stack and the software part of it. And we partner with as many of these companies as we can in these groups that have these components that we need to build a network and to actually operate it. So that's been really encouraging to see, and I'm excited to continue to watch that space and to foster those relationships with those companies, because it does take a village. No one company has all the right pieces. Just like the internet, there's no single service provider. There's no one company that can do it all, right? It takes components from all sorts of vendors. It takes contributions from standards organizations, from software companies, from hardware companies to build a network that we can actually use.
You've mentioned several different metrics. Is there a single metric you trust most when evaluating the maturity of a quantum system, or does it always depend on the context?
It's a really great question and a timely one that we're working on in some industry consortium, and I was just at a conference last month talking about this exact thing. Like, what are the important metrics? What is the common language and the definition of these metrics? I think it will be some combination of these performance metrics, like rate, like fidelity, and like distance, because those are broadly the things we care about, right? How broad is this network? What geographies does it cover? That tells us what kinds of applications we can think about. The rates and the fidelities tell us what kind of service quality can this quantum network provide. If it's too slow or if it's not good enough, then we can't rely on the security of these things, or that's not fast enough to connect quantum computers over this distance, right? So knowing that is really critical. But I think it will be some combination of speed, of quality, and of distance.
interesting. Wow. I mean, there's a lot to consider here, right? Like, it's not just about And another one of the other use cases, I know we're running low on time, so we'll have to probably have you come back. Quantum sensor networks, which if I were to posit what quantum networking is for, is you want to be able to sense the state of the particles and the entanglement, and then be able to send that state over a wire. Bear with me, over something, right? And then it be preserved on the other side where it could be read or whatever, done whatever with. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's so quantum sensors are arguably the most mature subfield of quantum technologies. And quantum sensors have been around, and we're talking about clocks, we're talking about magnetic sensors, sensors for electric fields, RF sensors, all sorts of sensors that have been worked on for decades and deployed and used today in systems that we use every day. GPS, right? So quantum sensors are very mature, but when you bring up networking quantum sensors, that's really an interesting intersection point of these two fields, where quantum sensors are great at measuring, something very locally with great degrees of precision. But when we think about networking these together and maybe entangling an array of sensors over a network, that opens the door for some really interesting applications, both for geodesy, for mapping, for not relying on GPS, for sensing fluctuations in the magnetic field and the electric field, doing better astronomy. So, how we collect light from stars and using entanglement to process that light in better ways so we can have higher resolution for, say, black hole imaging. There are all sorts of deep science questions that can be answered with quantum sensors in a distributed setting, which is a really, really exciting frontier that the community is thinking about deeply.
Oh, because the Earth rotates, so you could have a couple of these sensors, so that way you're always pointed at the same thing in space.
Right, and one first example of this is LIGO. So, basically, we have these telescopes collecting light from stars, and the way things are done today is that this light is collected, that data is processed using classical computers, and all those telescopes around the world will share their data. They'll bring it together, they'll aggregate it, and they'll process it and try and generate an image. Or some kind of data, end result for science. Now, how quantum changes the game there is, if these telescopes are actually entangled with each other, you can process that light in a very different way. Instead of just post-processing it on a classical computer, you can use these global entangled states to sense that light in a very different way, to process it in a very different way. Ultimately, with a quantum computer, they're all sorts of new features you can think about sensing and imaging for astronomy in that application. So it's a really, really interesting space. No pun
intended. That's funny. Sorry, Candace. I'm just gonna sit back and absorb that for a
I'm taking
minute.
it all in. I'm taking it all in. So what kinds of measurements become possible with quantum sensor networks that simply can't be done with classical sensing systems?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the field is thinking deeply about this question. There's kinds of evolutions of this whereby we can have one sensor that's great for many applications. Say it's an inertial sensor that's awesome for aircraft, and it has applications on its own. Then the next generation is, okay, what if we have a network of sensors, but there's no quantum connections between them? They're individual quantum sensors that can exchange data with each other classically. So that has some advantages there, just as an array. And then the next generation is, what if they are also entangled with each other? And then you can get more advantage. So the advantages come in precision and in accuracy. And as you have these sensors working together, you can actually enhance the precision that way. So there's something called the standard quantum limit, where there's a square root performance benefit with the number of sensors you have. So if you have k sensors, working together, you can get that square root K advantage in your precision and accuracy. So there's a lot of great theory kind of backing this up. I think the field writ large is thinking about, what are those killer applications, in the near term and the medium term. We have quantum networking on its own as a field. We have quantum sensing on its own as a field. So how do we intersect these two timelines and roadmaps and technology to actually work together to solve certain problems in science and position, navigation, timing, and astronomy, all sorts of application areas.
Wow. That's cool. I mean, it's just mind blowing, like what, because you hear about the hype about quantum computers, you don't think about the networking, right? Networking doesn't always come up in the hype cycle, right? However, very clearly, like you said, like you don't need to have a quantum computer to do quantum networking, right?
Right.
I would imagine that these photon generators and things like that, they probably don't need to be super cooled, guessing. So you could have this today with relatively modest comparatively investment.
Oh yeah, that's definitely right. Yeah, quantum computers are probably cost on the order of tens of millions of dollars, and quantum networks orders of magnitude less than that. And there are
Right.
off-the-shelf components you can buy and start to piece together these networks. There are all sorts of quantum photon sources and entanglement generators and photon detectors, all with different trade-offs, right? Some are tuned to certain wavelengths, right? They want to operate in the telecom regime. Others are great for visible light and free space. And that may lend itself better to, say, a satellite link or an intersatellite link. Some lasers might be better for fiber networks. Some lasers are faster than others, but generate a different kind of entanglement. So a lot of what we think about is like, okay, you have this landscape out there of all sorts of components and different approaches to generating quantum light. How do we stitch them together? How do these components actually interoperate with each other? Not just at the physical level, but over a network. How can they communicate with each other? What is a quantum network node? It's a collection of dozens of these things, right? You're going to have switches and photon sources and detectors, but it needs to be useful. There needs to be some logic, some control, some timing and synchronization infrastructure that actually supports all of these great applications. So that's what we spend most of our time thinking about, is building out these abstraction layers in the network stack to actually get these components to talk to each other in a useful way.
Wow. So this seems to me like this could be a burgeoning career field, really, like a quantum network engineer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's testament to how we've built our team and grown the team over time. It takes a village, and I think within all the subdomains of quantum, I would say quantum networking is the most interdisciplinary. We have folks on staff that are the PhD quantum physicists, but we have folks that worked in classical networking and built the products that power the internet. They know what it takes to build a network stack. They know what it takes to deploy a system in a data center or for a telecommunications company. What does it take to have 5 nines of service reliability, right? That's something in the classical networking space is a must-have. So taking those lessons learned from the classical networking world, combining that with the quantum expertise, and of course all of the amazing backgrounds we need to actually build products, and reliable software products. So we have traditional software engineers, but out in the field we're going to need traditional fiber engineers as well. So that's something that I'm excited to see over the coming years is a workforce development for quantum networking, and having upskilling programs to make this less daunting, to lower the barrier to entry. There are so many great engineers out there, and they don't need a PhD level quantum education to be to have a career in quantum networking. There are trade schools that train fiber engineers today, and those folks can be absolutely useful with minimal training, to set up this infrastructure, to monitor it, to go out and learn how to fix some issues that we might see in the network, to do updates, to do adds and changes, and to scale the network. There are all sorts of field engineering that we're going to need to really make this a reality. We talk about the quantum internet. We're well away from that, but right now we're we're at the point where you do see these metropolitan regions, these local area networks. There's dozens and dozens of them around the world. What's the natural next step is to start connecting them over longer distances. And that's how we're going to get there. But it doesn't take only quantum PhDs to do that. We need practical engineering expertise. We need classical engineering expertise to really make this a reality.
That's a good way to put it. As I like to say, someone has to rack them and stack them.
That's right. Yeah.
So we always ask this of everybody. So what is the biggest misconception that you hear out there about quantum computing that you would like to reframe, or just let them know this is wrong? What's one of the biggest misconceptions out there?
I think for many years that I've been in this space, the misconception was that there is going to be one single winner of quantum computing. There's going to be a winning platform, and that's going to look like a huge chandelier that has millions and millions of qubits on it. That's not the case. The future of quantum computing is going to be heterogeneous. I think different kinds of qubits will play different roles. I think apart from maybe certain modalities, I think broadly most of the quantum computing approaches will need to be networked. That's the only way they're going to reach scale. The difference is how many qubits can I get before I have to think about networking. Some might be on the order of a couple thousand. Others think they can scale on a single chip or a single atomic system to say 50 or 100,000 qubits, and then they need to network. So there's some difference there, but regardless, to get to the utility scale of quantum computing, you're going to need to network them, and that's something I'd like to shed some more light on. And I'm glad the community has kind of woken up and seen the need for networking these computers together recently, and that wasn't always the case. So I still think it's somewhat of a misconception, but for quantum computing to realize that they need to network. I mean, IBM just announced their plans to network their computers just a few months ago, right? So we're starting to see that shift, but shining more light on that is really important.
Interesting. You had mentioned a couple times something called free space.
Mhm.
I think I know what that means, but I don't think I do, like totally. Is this kind of like white space spectrum that's available or something else?
Yeah, so free space we use as a term to describe a quantum channel that's not over fiber. So
Okay.
it's wireless. Now there is a caveat there. So the Wi-Fi router I'm using now those signals can permeate through walls and things. The quantum signals, at least for quite some time, will need to be line of sight when you're talking about point-to-point free space. So, but there have been satellite deployments. We're working on some satellite deployments as well for quantum networks with our partners in the aerospace sector, which is really, really exciting. That's a critical part of the quantum internet. It's not just going to be fiber. If we really want to generate entanglement across continents, across oceans, we're going to need a satellite infrastructure to do that. But you do need this line of sight. And so that's what free space means for quantum networking. We won't be able to have a quantum Wi-Fi unless there's some, huge advancements and physics breakthroughs in terms of like microwave photons, but we can't depend on that. I think it's safe to say that, the quantum communication will be line of sight. So you need to be able to see your end node.
Yeah, we had a previous guest, Dr. Katanya Kuntz, had
Yes.
mentioned that they basically it's whatever she uses in her research is probably not limited to this, some flavor of infrared light and things like that. But okay, free space. I thought when you said free space, I thought you meant like spectrum that's available or whatever. The TV white space is what people used to call it, but that means something completely different. That's really cool. Thank you for explaining that. Any parting thoughts? Where can folks find out more about you, more about what Alero is doing?
Yeah, sure. I'm really really excited to get the chance to talk about quantum networking and its importance, not just in security and for governments and companies today, but also all the cool applications that can be derived from quantum networking. I think security is one that draws a lot of the attention, but we do play some of that fear motivation, right? We need to prepare our infrastructure for the quantum attacks. Absolutely. Like we need to drive that urgency. But at the same time, this is an infrastructure play, right? This is this quantum internet that we talk about has all sorts of amazing applications. And I'm sure a lot that we haven't even dreamt of, just like the internet, right? As it was getting started, we did not think about a Facebook or, this, all the internet services that we use today.
TikTok,
So,
brain rot, all
right,
that
TikTok,
stuff. Like,
yeah, all that stuff.
probably
right?
not thought about. Yeah.
So, there's a lot of room for innovation, and it's a really, really exciting field to be in. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it today. Feel free to reach out. We do also run a webinar series as well. If you want to learn more about what a quantum network is, how does it work, what are the trade-offs, everything from a 101 to what does it look like to deploy a quantum satellite. We try and address all those topics in an educational way. So feel free to check out our website, check out that webinar series if you want to learn more about quantum networking. And as always, feel free to reach out to me as well.
Very cool. Any parting
Thank
thoughts,
you.
Candace?
No, thank you so much for this conversation. I think the quantum networking is absolutely fascinating, and we're hearing more about it from different perspectives. So I'm just really happy that we got to hear about it from yours. So thank you again for your time.
Of course,
Yeah,
it was
thank
an
you.
honor being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you for coming, and I really learned quite a bit today.
Glad to
So
hear
and I
that.
hope our listeners did too. And with that, we'll play the outro music.
Turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's gold. The multiverse is skanking in time. Black holes are wailing in a horn line so fine. From Planck scales to planets, they're connecting the dots. Candace and Frank, they're the cosmic hot shot. Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's gold.